All right, guys, we're gonna get started with pneumatics. So the first things first is, what are pneumatics? So pneumatic means air powered or air controlled, and that is what teams in FRC use to, usually for rapid actuation of a mechanism. We do not use hydraulics in FRC. You're not allowed to, they're illegal first. So there's a couple main parts that go into pneumatics. The first one is obviously the compressor, then regulators, tanks, solenoids, and pistons. So the first one, compressor. A lot of these are very self-explanatory, is what the name is. The compressor compresses air. So you put power into the compressor, and it pumps air into a tank and compresses that air. They can come into different shapes and sizes, like that one down there. And these are the only FRC legal compressors, is this one right here. But you might see ones like that around. And then the compressor gets wired directly into the PCM, which is down covered. And then with regulators, and exactly the same thing. Regulators regulate air, or other things. So with that one up there, it controls the pressure. Thank you for having those panels down. That one, you attach a gauge to it, and that goes after the main tanks, and that it limits the air that goes into the piston, the solenoid. So that one controls the pressure. And then this one down here, we actually have a couple of these attached to our solenoids this year. These ones limit the flow of the air. So the top one controls how much force it has. This bottom one controls the speed in which a piston would move. Gauges, pressure switches. So the gauge displays the amount of pressure in the system. Ours are normally rated from 1 to 60. We're allowed a max of 125, but we like to stay around 120 PSI. Anything above that is not legal, and that's actually one of the reasons why we didn't pass inspection this year, is one of our, an automatic release wasn't tuned how it should be. And then this pressure switch on the bottom, this one reads the pressure that's in going through, and it will shut off the compressor at 120 PSI. And that one's also wired into the PCM, and that's how it controls the compressor. And then tanks, we have these. These are the two main. Actually, these are the only two FRC legal tanks, and they store and are rated for about 120 PSI. The clippered one on the top is ones that we usually use, and they're 574 milliliter tanks. And then these white ones are a little bit longer. They're 590. But we tend to use the black ones just because that's what we have. I'll answer your question after. Solenoids. There's two main different types of solenoids. There's single acting and double acting solenoids. Essentially, the single one allows one way of actuation. The double allows two ways. We really only use these because our mechanisms tend to need to be able to extend and also retract at the same time. That top one would be really good for only if you needed to extend something and not really bring it back in. So if you were doing like a climb, just a quick piston that needed to shoot up or actuate something outwards, that might be a use for that. But we tend to, like with our intake this year, we want to be able to go out but also back in. And then also the solenoids get wired directly into the PCM, which is the pneumatic control module, which was also covered in downs. The cylinders. So cylinders come in, just like compressors, come in many different shapes and sizes. And there's two main factors that go into what makes a cylinder a cylinder. One is the stroke, and the second one's the bore. So there's two terms you will hear quite often. So the stroke is how long the actual piston extends, and then the bore is how thick the rod is. So like this year, I think on our intake we used 7-inch stroke and 3/4 inch bore. The bore is, like, again, how thick the rod is, so that can help with if it's taking a lot of weight or torque to the side. Using a thicker bore could help you. Another one is these pancake cylinders. We have a couple of them laying around. We don't tend to use them for a lot of things. A lot of teams will use these in like shifting gearboxes because they only need a very small actuation. So that's these primary, the primary use for those. Emergency release valves. So there's also two different types of these ones. So we have an auto release, which is what wasn't tuned correctly while we failed inspection. This just twists down or twists up to, and then it will, as soon as it hits like 120 PSI, it automatically starts pumping air out, just in case the release or the the pressure switch isn't doing its job, malfunctioning, not plugged in correctly, and the compressor just keeps running. This helps stop that and prevent anything from happening. And then the manual release is just a quick way to release all the pressure in the robot. So you just flip that lever down and you've pumped all the air out of your system. You're required to have both of these on your robot just for safety reasons. You want a quick way to be able to get all the air out of your robot just in case the mechanism's pneumatically actuated and you need that to move or other stuff. The PCM, we've all, me and Don referenced this a couple times. I've referenced this a couple times already. This is the pneumatic control module. This controls and transmits power to all solenoids, the compressor, and the pressure switch. So, 8 different ports for 8 different cylinders or solenoids. And then the pressure switch is there, compressor is there. It also controls via CAN, and the power is up in that top corner. Okay. So that's more on the electronic side of things.
That's okay.
Just like that one, I have a diagram on mine. So this is kind of how things get wired or tubed up. So you have the compressor, which runs out to the automatic release, and then also the pressure switch. And then from there is where you run to a gauge for your tank. And then also, we like to put our tanks before or after. We put them after everything, and then put our cylinder and our pressure switch or the control gauge after the tanks. So we go compressor, the automatic release, the pressure switch, the tank gauge, and then move to the pressure. It helps keep things a little bit more organized. It looks a little bit better. And then you move to the pressure, solenoid, cylinder. And all of these have different fittings that go into them, but you guys know how to do those.
Like Simon said, I just wanted to emphasize that you can kind of put the configurations in a couple different ways. There is configurations that won't work, obviously, but there's a few ways to put things in.
You can't have a pressure release valve after a solenoid, because then you're not venting all your pressure. Yeah, the pressure release has to be in a position where it will vent all the pressure in your robot, because you don't want any air in there if you need to quickly disable that. And then we have the first documentation right here. Again, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, their library has that QR code. And then, any questions?